In the late 1800s, Armenians under the Ottoman Empire were fighting against the government after the Sultan refused to give them the same rights as the rest of the Ottoman Empire. Now, the people who were running the Ottoman Empire at this time were Turkish, so they believed that Turkish culture, traditions, and laws were the only real way to run a country. But once Armenians started challenging the government, this made the Turkish people in charge get kind of nervous. They were essentially like, how dare you think like there's another way to run this empire? Like, who do you think you are? You know, get the fuck out of here. I mean, they believed that they were the best. This is our place. What are you doing? Now, this caused Turkish extremists to bond over their common enemy, Armenians. And those extremists created an aggressive Turkish nationalist movement. The movement believed that Turkish civilization was superior to all others. It was basically them versus everyone else. If someone didn't agree with like the nationalist movement, chaos would break out on the streets. There were bloody demonstrations between Turkish nationalists and everyone else in the Ottoman Empire. So like no one felt safe leaving their house, okay? And the Sultan, he kind of loved it. He actually encouraged these nationalists to keep using violence against Armenians to keep them like in their place. Now, the Sultan believed he was justified in ordering acts of violence because no matter how much he punished them, Armenians were resisting the government. And that shit was pissing him off. In 1890, a reporter quoted the Sultan by saying, quote, "I will soon settle those Armenians. I will give them a box on the ear which will make them relinquish their revolutionary ambitions," end quote. In other words, he was going to find a way to violently punish them. So, the Sultan decides to hit the Armenians where it hurt. He was like, F that law, that Berlin rule, whatever. He increased their taxes even more. And he knew what he was doing because this was a setup. He knew this would piss people off and cause them to rebel against the government even more, which then would give his soldiers permission to send a message. So in 1894, one province refused to pay the new taxes. So the Sultan sent Ottoman troops to straight up go there and they set the entire Armenian villages on fire. Yep, they just lit it up. Men, women, children, it did not matter who it was, it did not matter. They burned it down. These villages were totally destroyed and it killed thousands of people. Now, again, because it was the government who did this, there were no consequences. Soldiers were free to punish and kill the Armenians however they saw fit. In 1895, the Sultan sent soldiers to the town of Urfa because he believed there was a strong resistance movement happening over there. So, with the Sultan's blessing, soldiers started killing people left and right. Just clean house, okay? Now, 3,000 people managed to escape the initial killings and tried to find a safe place to hide from all the violence. The only place big enough to hold all of the people was the local cathedral. So over 3,000 people, they go to this cathedral, they kind of pack themselves in there, they're praying, hoping to be safe, and that the soldiers would leave. But instead, the soldiers kind of figured out where they were all at, and they took this as an opportunity to murder them all at once. They set the cathedral on fire. Now listen, everyone inside burned alive. Horrible, tragic story, but it's just one of many that were happening at once. Between 1894 and 1897, these massacres continued in town after town after town. By the time they ended, somewhere between 100,000 and 300,000 Armenians had been killed by this point. These events ended up being called the Hamidian massacres, in honor of the Sultan Abdul Hamid II. I mean, would you be proud to have like a massacre named after you? Is that exciting? In honor of the. Okay, whatever. So the massacres ended up making headlines across the entire world. Other countries started sending aid to the Armenians. Actually, the American Red Cross sent their first ever international aid to the Armenians after these massacres. Now, all this negative press across the world started to make the Sultan pull back on the violence. And things kind of like calmed down a little bit, I guess. And the Armenian people, they did their best to rebuild what was left of their lives. Now, during all this, some Armenians fled to other countries. Others decided to stay because, everything and everyone they knew was, in the Ottoman Empire. This was their home. And a lot of them just, didn't want to start over, or, they couldn't afford to start over. So, after the initial round of massacres, different groups within the empire banded together. And listen, again, there's a lot of details here. So I apologize, I can't get into all the details, but a lot happened. But essentially, these political groups were able to finally overthrow the Sultan and take over the government. Now, this was a huge, shocking win. Generations of Armenian families had dealt with the violence from the Sultan, and no one had been able to do this before. And it wasn't easy. It wasn't just it happened in one day and it was yay, a lot of deaths, a lot of bad things, but they were able to do it. After the overthrow, the Ottoman Empire finally got a new and more fair constitution. People in the empire, not just Turkish nationalists, would now have equal rights. And for the first time in God knows how long, Armenians started to feel somewhat safe again. But sadly, a few years later, military leaders and nationalists started seizing power again. An extremist group called Turkey for the Turks began to take over the Ottoman Empire. Turkey for the Turks. I know, it sounds like Thanksgiving dinner. It was essentially another form of Turkish nationalism. And this couldn't have happened at a worse time. By 1914, World War I had broken out. We haven't done an episode on World War I, huh? No, I don't think we have. Well, anyways, long story short, the Ottoman Empire joined the war, and this led them to go to battle once again with their longtime enemy, Russia. And once again, Russia beat their ass badly, okay? Oops. Now, they're upset. They lost. They got their ass beat by Russia. You think they'd be you think they'd blame Russia. But instead, the Turkish government was no, it was the Armenians' fault. I know. It's all the stories we do, it's people just need to blame someone, and it's always the wrong people they blame, okay? Well, their excuse was that during the Hamidian massacres, Russia had welcomed Armenian refugees into their country for safety. They even allowed them to join the military to fight against the Ottoman Empire. So, in World War I, there were some Armenians fighting on Russia's side of the war. Despite the fact that thousands of Armenians fought on the side of the Ottoman Empire, the government decided to blame all Armenians for this defeat. And at this point, the whole world was distracted by the war, so they really weren't worried about, getting bad press over this. It's so weird, in my everyday life, I never really burp. It's only when I'm filming. And I wonder what that is. I'm sure there's a reason to it. I will chat GPT it later. Thank you. Okay, so the Ottoman Empire decided to take advantage of all this war and chaos happening, and they were hey, why don't we start another massacre? But this time, they were determined to get rid of all Armenians once and for all.